You know, for 42 years, Muammar Gaddafi was just this massive contradiction. For some people, he was an absolute hero, the guy who dragged a poor desert country into the modern age, making it rich and taking care of its people. But for others, he was a monster, a brutal dictator, and a sponsor of terror around the world. So the big question is, how could he be both? To figure that out, we've really got to dig into the whole story of his rise to power and his incredibly brutal fall.
So let's start near the end. It's 2011. The Arab Spring is kicking off all over the place, and now it's hit Libya. Gaddafi gets on TV, and he is just seething. He's talking about the protesters, his own people, and he promises to hunt them down alley by alley, house by house. And he gives them a name. He calls them rats. And then, the ultimate irony. Just 8 months later, October 20th, 2011, where do they find him? Not in some fortified bunker or a lavish palace. Nope. They find him hiding, cowering inside a concrete sewer pipe. And who pulls him out? The very same people he called rats. It's just unbelievable.
So, you have to ask yourself, how did this happen? How does a guy who called himself the King of Kings of Africa end up like this, killed by his own people? He started out as this charismatic revolutionary with so much promise. What went so wrong? Well, to get the answer, we can't start at the end. We've got to go all the way back to the beginning.
Okay, so let's jump in. Section 1, we're calling this the beginning of the end, because really, to understand how it all fell apart, you need to see how it all started, out in the vast Libyan desert. So Gaddafi's story starts in 1942. He was born into this poor, nomadic family literally in the middle of the desert, and he was a troublemaker, a rebel, right from the get-go. By 1961, he gets himself expelled from school for activism. He was really inspired by guys like Egypt's President Nasser, this huge figure in Arab nationalism. So Gaddafi figures, the military, that's my ticket. He gets into the Royal Military Academy in '63, and just a year later, he's already forming a secret group, the Free Officers Movement, to overthrow the whole system. And then bam, September 1st, 1969, the king is out of the country, and a 27-year-old Gaddafi leads a completely bloodless coup. Just like that, he's in charge.
All right, Section 2, Rise of a Revolutionary. And look, in the beginning, people didn't see him as a tyrant at all. He came across as this popular reformer, and he moved fast, using Libya's money to totally change the country. And honestly, for a lot of people, it was for the better.
And how did he do it? Well, it all came down to oil. His first big move was to nationalize the entire oil industry. Basically, he kicked out the foreign companies and said, "This belongs to Libya now." And the result was absolutely staggering. Look at this number. Per capita income shot up to $7,000. I mean, to put that in perspective, that was more than what people were making in Britain or even Italy, their old colonial ruler. It was a huge economic shockwave.
And he didn't just hoard that money. That oil wealth completely transformed Libyan society. I mean, we're talking free housing for citizens. Free healthcare and education suddenly became available to everyone. He doubled the minimum wage, and get this, and this was a huge deal for the region back then. He made equal pay for women the law. He even started this ridiculously ambitious project called the Great Man-Made River, the biggest irrigation project in the world, to literally bring water to the desert. So for a lot of ordinary Libyans, life got way, way better.
Okay, Section 3, the turn to tyranny. Because of course, all that progress came at a cost. There was a very, very dark side to all this. As Gaddafi got more comfortable in his power, the reformer started to fade, and the dictator started to emerge. So he cooked up his own political theory, this thing he called Jamahiriya. He said it meant state of the masses, and he sold it as this amazing new form of direct democracy. But that was just talk. In reality, it was a total smokescreen for his absolute control. He banned all political parties, made it illegal for workers to go on strike. Basically, every single bit of power in the country, it all led straight back to one person, him. And this is where you really see the two faces of Gaddafi, the deep paradox of his rule. On one hand, yeah, he built schools and hospitals. On the other, he banned newspapers and churches. He made a huge public show of promoting women's rights with his famous all-female bodyguard unit, the Amazonian Guard. But then you hear the horrifying stories from survivors about the sexual abuse they endured. He'd give these grand speeches about Arab unity, while at the same time, his hit squads were hunting down and killing his critics living abroad. It's just a stark, brutal contrast. And his cruelty could be just off the charts. Take the Abu Salim prison massacre in 1996. The prisoners were protesting the terrible conditions. The response? Absolute butchery. His forces killed over 1,200 of them. Not in a battle, they were lined up and machine gunned down in just a couple of hours. Their bodies were dumped in a mass grave, and for years, their families had no idea what happened to them. This is the kind of terror that kept people in line. Which brings us to our fourth section, dictator and terrorist. Because Gaddafi's violence wasn't just for his own people. By the 1980s, he started taking his vision global. He turned Libya into a home base for international terrorism and, in the process, made himself an enemy of pretty much the entire world. He started funding terrorist groups all over the world. Things really came to a head in 1986. Libyan agents bombed a nightclub in Berlin that was full of American soldiers. The US hit back hard with airstrikes. But the one act that sealed his fate as a global outcast was in 1988. The bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland. 270 people, just gone. That was the last straw. The United Nations came down on him with crushing economic sanctions. Libya was officially a pariah state. And you know, at the time, US President Ronald Reagan came up with a nickname for him that just summed it all up. He called him the Mad Dog of the Middle East. And that name? It stuck. It perfectly captured how the West saw him, just this dangerous, totally unpredictable madman.
And that brings us to the final chapter, Section 5, the final fall. I mean, for decades, it really seemed like Gaddafi was untouchable. He had the oil money, he had the fear, but then came 2011, the Arab Spring. That massive wave of change finally washed up on Libya's shores, and his entire 42-year empire started to just fall apart. And it happened fast. So here's how it all went down. It started with peaceful protests, inspired by what was happening in Tunisia and Egypt. Gaddafi's reaction? Completely predictable. He told his army to just open fire on unarmed civilians. The world was horrified. That led to the UN authorizing NATO to step in, mainly to protect people from their own government. With NATO planes providing cover, the rebel forces started pushing back. By August, they took the capital, Tripoli. And Gaddafi? He was on the run, a fugitive in his own kingdom.
And that, right there, brings us full circle, back to where we started. After 2 months as a fugitive, they cornered him in his own hometown of Sirte. This is a man who lived in golden palaces, who literally named himself the King of Kings, and his final moments on Earth were spent inside a filthy drainage pipe before he was dragged out and killed. You really can't miss the symbolism here. His end was just like his rule, violent, chaotic, and in the end, just deeply humiliating.
So, after all that, what are we left with? What is Gaddafi's true legacy? Was he the revolutionary hero who built up his country, who gave people homes and schools and healthcare? Or was he the monster, the tyrant who murdered his own people and terrorized the world? The hardest part to accept is that the answer is yes. He was both. And that complicated, contradictory, and tragic reality is the legacy of Muammar Gaddafi.